In March 2021, months before Snowdrop ever hit the screen, pieces of the synopsis and character descriptions leaked online. Normally, leaked character bios just get fans hyped like, ooh, who's the second lead, who's gonna get their heart broken this time? But in this case, one detail flipped everything upside down. The male lead wasn't just some campus heartthrob caught up in the chaos of the late 1980s. According to the leak, he was actually a North Korean spy, pretending to be a pro-democracy student activist in South Korea. Now, if you don't know the history, that might sound like your typical spy thriller twist, a bit of crash landing on you energy, right? But for South Koreans, that hit a nerve so raw it was basically like throwing salt in a wound that never healed. Here's why. 1987 wasn't just another year. South Korea had been living under authoritarian rule for decades. The military dictatorship had a stranglehold on politics, the press, and daily life. But the tension boiled over that year after the death of a student named Park Jong-chul, who was tortured during interrogation by security forces. His death, and later the killing of another student protester, Lee Han-yeol, lit a fire under the public. Students poured into the streets. Workers joined them. Ordinary people who were sick of living under dictatorship risked their lives demanding direct presidential elections and democracy. This became known as the June Struggle, and it's remembered as the movement that cracked open the path to modern South Korean democracy. Now here's the kicker. The Chun Doo-hwan regime, the authoritarian government in power, had a propaganda tactic. Whenever activists rose up, they smeared them as North Korean sympathizers or outright spies. It was the ultimate way to delegitimize the democracy movement. And because South Korea was still technically at war with the North, that accusation wasn't just slander, it was dangerous. Being branded a spy could ruin your life or worse. So when people read that Snowdrop's male lead, a character posing as a pro-democracy activist, was actually a North Korean spy, it felt like the show was echoing the same lie the dictatorship used against real protesters. For many, that wasn't just poor taste. It was like rewriting history in a way that sided with the oppressors. And it didn't stop there. Another character, Lee Kong-moo, was described as an agent of the ANSP, the Agency for National Security Planning. That was the regime's intelligence agency, and its track record wasn't exactly heroic. This is the group that spied on citizens, crushed dissent, and was directly tied to torture and human rights abuses. Yet the leaked description painted Lee Kong-moo as a principled man, a kind of righteous agent within a corrupt system. To South Korean netizens, that sounded a lot like whitewashing history, the kind of revisionism that tries to soften a brutal institution into something noble. So in the public's eyes, the leaks weren't just clumsy storytelling choices. They looked like a drama that could distort the memory of the democracy movement, soften the image of a violent security agency, and validate the very lies the dictatorship used to stay in power. And once that suspicion took root, the internet outrage machine kicked into high gear. With outrage spreading online, JTBC, the broadcaster behind Snowdrop, had to step in and try to calm things down. On March 26th, they put out their first official statement. And honestly, it was kind of a mess. They said, "The drama isn't distorting the democracy movement. It's a black comedy satirizing politics between the two Koreas in the 80s. Also, don't worry, it's really a romance about young people who sacrifice their love." Now, that combo of words didn't do them any favors. Calling a story set against the backdrop of South Korea's bloodiest democracy fight a black comedy? Yeah, you can imagine how that sounded to people whose parents or grandparents actually marched in those protests. Felt tone-deaf at best, dismissive at worst. But JTBC didn't stop there. A few days later, on March 30th, they released a second statement trying to clarify things further. This time they argued, Snowdrop isn't about the democracy movement at all. It's set around the 1987 presidential election, and the story is about the military regime colluding with North Korea to stay in power. So, in their words, it's really a fictional conspiracy thriller, not a drama that rewrites history. And they also tried to clean up one of the most sensitive points. The ANSP agent, Lee Kong-moo. Remember, the leaked profile made him sound like a righteous intelligence officer. JTBC doubled down, saying, yes, he's principled, but the whole point is that he turns his back on the corrupt organization. In other words, don't worry, he's one of the good ones. But none of this really calmed people down for a few reasons. First, the leaks had already planted a seed of mistrust. Once audiences think you're messing with their history, saying don't worry, it's fiction isn't enough. Second, JTBC's explanation about the drama being set around the election instead of the protests didn't help much, because in reality, those two events are inseparable. The June struggle was what led to the 1987 election. You can't really separate them. Felt like JTBC was splitting hairs. And then came the character name fiasco. At the time, the female lead was named Eun Young Cho, but netizens noticed right away. That sounded almost identical to the name of Chun Young Cho, a real pro-democracy activist who was imprisoned and tortured by the regime in the 1980s. JTBC swore it wasn't intentional, but they agreed to change the name to avoid further controversy. The damage was already done, though. People saw it as yet another sign that the production team wasn't handling the subject with care. So instead of putting out the fire, JTBC's statements kind of fanned the flames. The more they explained, the more people dug in. It was no longer just about what the drama might show, but about whether the creators could be trusted at all. By late March, the anger around Snowdrop wasn't just living in the comment sections anymore. It was on the streets. On March 30th, a protest truck parked itself outside JTBC's headquarters in Seoul. These trucks are basically the K-drama version of bringing a megaphone to someone's front door. They're loud, they're public, and they scream, "We want everyone walking by to know you messed up." But the real storm was online. An official Blue House petition racked up 226,078 signatures demanding the show's cancellation. And here's why that number matters. In South Korea, hitting 200,000 signatures forces the government to respond. So this wasn't just a fan rebellion, this was now a political hot potato. And the context here is crucial. Just weeks earlier, Joseon Exorcist got obliterated after only 2 episodes for historical distortion. People were furious at its portrayal of Korean royals eating Chinese food and drinking imported liquor. It was seen as cultural whitewashing. The backlash was so intense, advertisers fled overnight, and SBS canceled the whole thing almost immediately. So when Snowdrop's synopsis leaked, people already had their pitchforks sharpened. To a lot of netizens, this wasn't just another drama with creative liberties. It looked like déjà vu, another show playing with history in a way that could smear real struggles. And since Joseon Exorcist had just been taken out like a mob hit, the public figured, why not do the same to JTBC? But here's the plot twist. On May 14th, the Blue House rejected the cancellation demand. Their reason? Freedom of expression. Under Korea's broadcasting law, the government isn't supposed to interfere with broadcasters' independence. In other words, we don't like controversy, but we can't be the censorship police. That said, it wasn't a full endorsement either. They added a caveat that if Snowdrop actually crossed the line, like if it did straight-up historical denialism, the Korea Communications Standards Commission could step in. Think of it like the government saying, "Fine, you can cook your weird soup, but we're watching the pot." This is where Snowdrop and Joseon Exorcist diverged. Joseon Exorcist got hit with a death sentence almost instantly because SBS folded under advertiser pressure and public outrage. Snowdrop, on the other hand, had institutional backing, even if it was reluctant backing from the government's free expression stance. That protection didn't make the anger disappear, but it gave JTBC enough breathing room to actually air the show instead of getting axed before episode 1. So before Snowdrop even premiered, the whole thing felt less like TV hype and more like a political trial. Protest trucks outside buildings, 250,000 signatures, and the government forced to weigh in. It was a level of pre-release drama that most shows can only dream or have nightmares about. Here's the real signal that the outrage wasn't just hot air. When money starts running for the exits. Brands that had their logos plastered all over Snowdrop suddenly started ghosting the drama faster than a bad Tinder date. Big names like Handsome, Tizen, and Hyunjul Furniture yanked their sponsorships as the controversy snowballed. And honestly, can you blame them? This wasn't just a Twitter spat, it was a full-blown PR wildfire. Companies didn't want to be associated with a show accused of rewriting the story of South Korea's fight for democracy. And let's not forget, this was right on the heels of Joseon Exorcist getting Thanos snapped off the air after only 2 episodes. If one drama could get cancelled that fast, brand managers watching Snowdrop trending for all the wrong reasons weren't about to gamble their reputations. No amount of product placement is worth being dragged into a national controversy. By the time the sponsor list started shrinking, JTBC looked like the last kid standing at dodgeball. Technically, they could still air the show, but the damage was done. Public trust was already tanked, and the drama hadn't even aired its first episode yet. The network was left holding a high-budget drama that had gone viral for controversy instead of content. A tough spot for any broadcaster. Here's where you see the real-world consequences of online outrage. Petitions and protests are one thing, but when wallets start speaking, everyone notices. Advertisers bail, universities demand their names be taken off credits, and suddenly a fictional story is triggering real-world fallout. It's a reminder that in K-drama land, history controversies don't stay in the script. They spill into boardrooms and billing statements. By December 21st, the outrage machine had officially gone nuclear. JTBC's website was flooded with over 3,000 cancellation requests, because apparently nothing says civic engagement like crashing a broadcaster's inbox. Meanwhile, the Korea Communication Standards Commission got hit with 740 official complaints, basically their version of a Yelp review bombing, but for democracy. And it didn't stop there. Things escalated from dramatic to downright absurd. A citizen complaint was filed accusing the creators of violating the National Security Act. Yes, the same law designed to catch actual spies was now being wielded against a melodrama starring Jisoo. It's as if historical paranoia turned into procedural paperwork. The real curveball came from a civic group called World Citizen Declaration, who attempted to drag Snowdrop into court. They filed an injunction demanding the drama be completely halted. At that point, the show hadn't even aired more than one episode, and yet it was basically on trial in the court of law, social media, and public opinion simultaneously. Then the court finally weighed in on December 29th and basically threw some shade. Look, even if the drama's historically sus, there's no evidence it actually violates civil rights or brainwashes viewers. This ruling drew a sharp line between genuine historical crimes and fictional storytelling, which is something Joseon Exorcist never really got the chance to clarify before it got cancelled. With Snowdrop, the court essentially said, you're free to make your drama, just don't break the law. It was the first taste of legal pushback against the outrage, a reminder that while petitions, protest trucks, and sponsor pullouts can make headlines, the law doesn't automatically side with viral rage. In other words, the drama survived the pre-release public trial, for now. The Snowdrop controversy wasn't just a Twitter firestorm, it spilled over into real-world politics. On December 23rd, Sim Sang-young, a 2022 presidential candidate for the Justice Party, stepped into the fray. Her message was clear. If you're going to shine a light on a harsh era, focus on the ordinary citizens who actually fought for democracy, not the spies and security agents serving a dictatorship. Basically, she told JTBC, creative freedom is fine, but maybe don't treat the scars of history like optional background scenery. Sim's point hit hard because it tapped into a wider question. When does artistic liberty cross the line into historical insensitivity? For many viewers, this wasn't just entertainment. It was about respect for people who literally risked their lives for freedom. It's a debate that Joseon Exorcist never had the chance to face because it was cancelled so quickly. Snowdrop was now the stage for a national conversation on the responsibilities of storytellers versus the rights of audiences to engage freely with fiction. Of course, defenders weren't staying quiet. Director Jong Yoon-cheol argued that censoring the drama would be a different kind of dictatorship, citing films like Hiroshima Mon Amour and The Lives of Others, love stories featuring morally gray characters navigating dark historical periods. Political commentator Chin Young-kwan cut through the drama with 6 simple words. Just watch it as a drama. Which sounds obvious, but apparently was revolutionary advice in the middle of a pitchfork frenzy. Basically, the controversy became a tug-of-war between historical sensitivity and creative freedom, with millions of viewers stuck somewhere in the middle, popcorn in hand. On one side, people feared that bending history for romance could trivialize real sacrifices. On the other, critics argued that art's job is sometimes to provoke, complicate, and even unsettle. Snowdrop didn't just ignite debate about a TV show, It sparked a national conversation about how we remember the past and who gets to decide what's off-limits when telling a story. It was the kind of debate that makes you realize K-dramas might be entertainment, but when they touch raw historical wounds, they become more than fiction. They're a mirror reflecting how society negotiates memory, trauma, and freedom of expression. Even after the KCSC cleared Snowdrop, the drama didn't just waltz off into the sunset. JTBC, clearly tired of being everyone's punching bag, decided to go full scorched earth. They sued netizens for defamation. Yep, if you dragged Snowdrop too hard online, you risked catching a lawsuit from the network itself. Bold move, considering the internet exists to drag things. And the discourse? Oh, it never really died. Some viewers said the ruling proved the outrage was overblown. Others doubled down, arguing the show still insulted the memory of student activists, even if technically it wasn't illegal. Basically, Snowdrop became one of those cultural scars. A drama less remembered for its plot and more for the battlefield it turned the internet into. So what's the legacy here? Was it a misunderstood love story caught in the crossfire of history? Or was it a tone-deaf misfire that poked a wound too raw to touch? Depends who you ask. But one thing's certain, this wasn't just TV. This was war. Fast forward a few months, and the Korea Communications Standards Commission finally dropped their verdict. Spoiler alert. From episode 1 to the finale, Snowdrop did not distort history or disrespect the democratization movement. Their statement was basically, chill, this isn't even worth discussing in our broadcasting subcommittee. Translation: all the protest trucks, petitions, advertiser bailouts, and lawsuits? Technically unnecessary. The drama wasn't illegal, it wasn't misleading viewers, and it wasn't some grand conspiracy to rewrite democracy. All that fire and fury. And the commission said, meh, move along. It's kind of wild when you think about it. Nearly 500,000 signatures demanding cancellation, brands fleeing like it was a horror movie, memorial foundations publicly condemning it, civic groups filing lawsuits, and the official ruling boiled down to, nah, it's fine. This is a perfect example of the gap between public perception and legal reality. Outrage can move mountains online, but the courts and regulatory bodies measure by the letter of the law, not the volume of hashtags. It also highlights the paradox of Korean media culture. History is sacred, yes, but there's also a legal recognition that storytelling has room to be messy, complicated, and even uncomfortable. Snowdrop survived the storm, not because it wasn't controversial, but because it wasn't actually breaking any rules. And in the end, that's what makes this controversy a case study in how fiction, history, and public opinion collide in real time. From leaks to petitions, sponsor pullouts to court battles, Snowdrop wasn't just a drama, it was a masterclass in modern media firestorms. And when the smoke finally cleared, the official verdict: creative freedom wins. For now. If you were scrolling Twitter during the Snowdrop saga, you probably noticed something. International fans and Korean fans were living in two totally different realities. Outside Korea, a lot of fans shrugged at the controversy. To them, Snowdrop was just another K-drama with pretty leads, a tragic love story, and enough melodrama to fuel 1,000 edit compilations. Some even thought the backlash was overblown, it's just fiction, calm down became a common refrain. But inside Korea, totally different vibe. For many, this wasn't about shipping or pretty OSTs, it was about national history. People who lived through the 1980s, or had family members who did, weren't thrilled at seeing democracy activists' sacrifices tangled up with a spy romance plot. What international fans saw as just a story, Korean viewers experienced as a direct hit to their collective memory. That clash in perspective basically split the fandom down the middle. One side defending the show as art, the other condemning it as cultural amnesia. And if nothing else, it proved one thing: what plays as entertainment abroad can land like a grenade at home. In the end, Snowdrop did air all 16 episodes. It didn't get cancelled, democracy didn't collapse, and Jisoo still became a K-drama lead. But the controversy left a mark. For some, Snowdrop will always be a tragic love story. For others, it's forever the drama that tried to remix history and got burned for it. And if you're keeping track, congratulations, You just survived a full history lesson disguised as a K-drama controversy breakdown. December 18th, 19, 21, 22, 24. Over 30 petitions, 300,000 signatures, 3,000 cancellation requests, 740 complaints. My brain feels like it's filing taxes in triplicate. Honestly, at this point, the drama could have been called Snowdrop. The spreadsheet edition, and nobody would have batted an eye. What the whole saga really showed is that sometimes K-dramas are cultural battlegrounds. When a story brushes up against wounds that still feel fresh, audiences aren't going to stay quiet. And no matter how many times JTBC insisted, it's just fiction, history is never just fiction. This is the story of Snowdrop, a drama so controversial, it sparked petitions, pulled sponsorships, and ended up in court. Whether you call it misunderstood art or a political misstep, one thing's for sure, it didn't just air, it blew up the way we talk about history, memory, and creative freedom.